Hey, Brent Messmer here with Technical Taekwondo. Today we are going to be talking about the history of Taekwondo. More exactly what we're going to be talking about is the 5 Kwans that originally started Taekwondo after the Korean War was over and people came back in. But prior to 1955 there was no Taekwondo. So where did it come from? One of the best books that's been researched on this is a book by Alex Gillis. His name is The Killing Art. It's real good. It's a real interesting read as well. So it's not a boring, dry history book. Especially if you're into the art of Taekwondo and you want to learn more about your history, you should know your lineage and where you come from. From 1910 to 1945, there was nothing going on. Koreans were not allowed to do anything. They were occupied by Japan. They weren't even allowed to speak their name in Korean. They had to change their name to a Japanese-sounding name. Completely suppressed their culture. In this time period, if parents could afford to, they would send their male children, obviously not the girls, sorry, different culture, but they would send the boys off to school. While they were off to school, they would either go to Japan and learn from Funakoshi, generally, was one of the big ones because he taught at one of the colleges, or they would go someplace else in Japan, depending on where they were, and they would learn one of their fighting styles, either Shorin-ryu or Shoei-ryu. The other option was to go to China and learn one of the Kung Fu styles while you're in China. So that's pretty much what the options were. And when these guys came back after the war was over and after the Japanese was no longer in Korea, they got their country back. There was a big period of unrest in this whole time frame. And then shortly following was the Korean War, which is another, big mess. When these guys would come back, they would open up their own schools to teach what they taught. That's kind of what we're going to go into a little bit. If you were going to a Japanese school, a lot of them did get to train with Funakoshi, who was the founder of Shotokan. The other option was when you were in China, is you would study Chun-Fa or Chinese Kung Fu. So if you went to the northern part of China to study and to learn, obviously you studied more of a northern style of Kung Fu, or you could go to the southern part of China and study southern style Kung Fu. The difference is the northern styles tend to emphasize fast, powerful kicks, high jumps, generally rapid fluid movement, where the southern styles focus on strong arm and hand techniques with stable, immovable stances and fast footwork. It sounds contradictory, that last two things I said, but that's the research I found, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense how you can have a movable stance and fast footwork in the same sentence, but I don't do Kung Fu, so I'm not 100% sure what that means. White Crane Kung Fu was a huge influence on what is now modern day Taekwondo because out of the 5 major branches, I think 2 or 3 of them were more southern style Kung Fu, White Crane Kung Fu. So you have a lot of the long range attacks as well as some of the White Crane traditional fighting techniques that are in there. But the White Crane is also comfortable at fighting close quarters. So a little bit different. There is a fabricated Korean history that you can read in a bunch of old textbooks from the Koreans about the ancient art of Taekwondo going back 2,000 years and the 3 ancient kingdoms, and it's all a bunch of nonsense. But they've kind of abandoned that because people now know what the truth is, but they're also still, if you go on Wikipedia, you'll see so-and-so Grandmaster says that he started in Taekwondo, or he learned from the last Grandmaster of Taekwondo. Taekwondo, as far as what I can tell, is a game involving throws and some takedowns. I don't really know. It's very, very vague when people reference it. But the only thing I can think of is they want to keep the hope alive that Taekwondo, because it has some of the same letters as Taekwondo, somehow influenced modern day Taekwondo. I don't believe any Taekwondo had any influence whatsoever on Taekwondo. It's just a thing that some of the Koreans are still clinging to. While these guys were also studying Shotokan, some of these guys actually went a different route, and they studied Aiki-Jiu-Jitsu. Aiki-Jiu-Jitsu is a fighting art directly from the Minamoto samurai clan. Basically, it is what do you do when you're disarmed or you're unarmed. So that is where Aiki-Jiu-Jitsu comes into play, which is where Aikido came from. It is also where Hapkido came from. In fact, when two of the main guys left their master, one went to go teach in Japan, one went to go teach in Korea, they had the same character for Aikido Jiu-Jitsu. Well, it was Aikido in Japan and it was Hapkido in Korean. It's just pronounced different. Okay, so it means the exact same thing because at one point in time it was the exact same thing. Young Sol had to adapt his Hapkido, or his Aikido Jiu-Jitsu, which is now Hapkido. He had to adapt to all these judo guys that were coming in and threatening and challenging people. So he had to learn how to modify what he did to deal with these Hapkido guys. So that is how Hapkido evolved into a small circle versus a big circle of Aikido. What's really interesting to me is Hapkido is a part of all the 5 major Kwans. If you actually go through the history of the different Kwans, Hapkido is there. Someone's doing Hapkido, someone's doing White Crane Kung Fu, someone's doing Shotokan, Shorin-ryu, or Shoiryu. They're all there. But in the history of Taekwondo, Hapkido is never mentioned. I always thought that was really weird and kind of interesting. They've been together since before the name Taekwondo was a thing. Hapkido has been there as a supporting player, but it's never mentioned in any of the histories of anybody. I just find that super interesting, and I really don't have an explanation why. I haven't found anything that supports why they wouldn't talk about them both being together. Because to me, I don't separate my Hapkido from my Taekwondo as far as my fighting style goes. They're both there together. The first of the 5 major Kwans that we're going to talk about is the Sangma Kwan. Sometimes pronounced Sangma Kwan. If you see it, it's just the pronunciation. Sangma Kwan and Songmu Kwan. There's not 2 different schools, it's just one. It's originally founded by Byung-jik-ro, which means Ever Youthful House. Some also know it as the House of Wavering Pines, which pays homage to Funakoshi. Byung-jik-ro started training in 1936. He studied with Won-Kook Lee, who starts the Cheongda Kwan eventually. Byung-jik-ro and Kook Lee basically started about the same time. They went to study Shotokan with Funakoshi, returned back to Korea in 1944, which is when he opened the Sangma Kwan. At the time, the Koreans were getting paid large sums of money to train the American soldiers. So around this time, they opened up the schools, and they could pretty much charge the Americans whatever they want, they'd pay it. 1944, the Sangma Kwan opened, became one of the bigger schools in Korea. The kicking techniques of the Sangma Kwan system is really what they became famous for. Very powerful, long-range kicks, a lot of jumping, very spectacular to watch. These guys would pretty much jump on every single kick that they threw. If you watch someone who, if they're doing a lot of jumping when they're kicking, they're a Sangma Kwan school. That's actually the history of our instructor's instructor. Mugyal Lee was Sangma Kwan. Their lineage was jumpers. These guys love to fly. That's what the Sangma Kwan guys are known for. Cheongda Kwan is the next one we're going to talk about. It was the 2nd largest school in Korea. The Cheongda Kwan means Blue Wave School. Won-Kook Lee could have started with the Taekyon. They keep hinting at that. You'll see that in some of the history things. You'll if you're looking up and trying to research something for yourself. But there's nothing to back it up. There's nothing there. So in 1926, he was sent to Chow University in Japan, where he got to study with Chosun Chibana, who I believe was Funakoshi's instructor. He ended up earning his 4th degree black belt under Gishin Funakoshi, but he also got to travel to Shanghai and Okinawa and got more than just training under Funakoshi. So when he came back in 1944, so we're 18 years later, he opened up the Blue Wave School. He was a lawyer, so he had connections with the law enforcement, and this basically became known as the police school. So a lot of the police, National Guard, that kind of thing, would come through his system and learn his way of fighting. At this time, there was a lot of schools that were just becoming bullies and were just fighting to be fighting kind of a thing. So he wanted to bring a sense of honor to the martial arts. He was kind of the one who pushed the 5 tenets of Taekwondo and really made that a thing. The Chung Kwan and the Sim Kwan, they trained together for a very long time, so they were also known for having a lot of strong kicks with their tactics and fighting styles. They didn't jump as much, but they did jump kicks, and they did a lot of sliding or hop kicks. They would eventually go on to split off to form the Oda Kwan, which is where General Choi and the ITF came from. So moving on to the next biggest school was the Muda Kwan. Muda Kwan's a little bit different. Instead of going to Japan and learning Shotokan, Yang Kuk Jin studied Kung Fu in Manchuria. This was back in 1936. So he studied Northern style Kung Fu for almost a decade, where he came back and met Wan Kuk Lee at the Chung Kwan and got his green belt under the Chung Kwan system. Then he opened up his own location the year after that. Combined his Kung Fu with what Kuk Lee was doing at the Chung Kwan. So his techniques were more heavily favored the Kung Fu versus the Shotokan. Still a little bit of a blend, but more heavy with the hands and the light, quick, fast movements of the Kung Fu system. In 1957, he found an ancient text that was supposed to be about 300 years old called the Mu Yu Do Bo Tong Ji. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Supposedly it detailed a bunch of techniques of the Subak, which was supposedly an ancient text of the Koreans' Emperor's elite army. He actually went through and modified his system based off of this ancient text. Probably just a bunch of crude drawings, but he seemed to put a lot of faith into it, and he changed his system really based on this. I don't know that much about it. That's how he came up with his system with the Muda Kwan. The next school that came out was the Changmu Kwan, which eventually changed its name to Kwan Bop. Kwan Bop was essentially the external side of Chuan Fa, or the external side of Kung Fu. The external techniques were the joint locks, the strikes, the jumping kicks, the elaborate balance and footwork drills. The internal techniques, he decided were too difficult to master, so he wasn't even going to teach any of that. He just taught the external stuff. Byung In Yoon went to Manchuria to study Northern-style Kung Fu when he was in middle school. Later, when he went to college, he ended up going to Shooteroo Karate, studied with Kenken Toyama. There's very little difference in what Funakoshi was teaching and what Toyama is teaching at this time. Young Bunen's skills with the Kung Fu got the attention of Toyama. So they ended up, even though he was younger than Toyama, ended up taking him on as a mentor, and basically they learned almost as much from each other, because Byung In Yoon would teach the Kung Fu and Toyama would teach the version of Shotokan, which is Shooteroo. In 1946, Yoon left the university as a 4-3 black belt and opened up the Changmu Kwan. So during the Korean War, Yoon would actually turn out missing, presumed killed, and his teachings were actually carried on by his top student, Nam Suk Lee, who eventually changed the name from the Kwan Bop to the Chung Kwan. Because of the Northern-style Kung Fu influences, Kwan Bop students were well known for their powerful side kicks and their jump kicks as well. So the Jita Kwan school was Seng Sup Chun. He actually started in judo, and at 17 he attended college in Japan and began studying Shotokan under Funakoshi. Seng Sup Chun and Byung In Yoon, who we just talked about, the founder of Kwan Bop, they would travel and train with other martial arts and they would just go around and train with different people for a long time. He finally opened up the Jita Kwan school. He was probably one of the most well-rounded fighters of the time, and that's kind of what they were known for, was the Jita Kwan guys could fight. Didn't matter what it was as far as style goes, they didn't care. The Jita Kwan guys could fight. That's what they were really known for. Some of the smaller schools that came out later was the Jita Kwan, the Oda Kwan, Kang Duk, or the Kukmu Kwan, the Jungda Kwan, and the Hanmu Kwan. Some of the last ones are really just repeats of, as far as just a student would leave and open up their own school kind of a thing. General Hong Hai Che formed the core group of his students and created the Oda Kwan system. The Otakwan originated with a elite division in the Korean infantry. If you are in or were in the Korean Army, you learned General Che's Otakwan. General Che also is the one who split off and formed the ITF, because General Che had a bunch of friends in northern Korea. This, obviously, right after the Korean War, a lot of bad, hurt feelings were present. So he was kind of the front runner to create this nationalist idea of a martial art. He's the one who came up with the name Taekwondo. It was rejected at first because he came up with it. General Che had friends in northern Korea. He was sympathetic to their cause, and this upset a lot of people at the time. He ended up initially starting part of the KTA. Ended up being, it was actually Korean Taekwondo Association, which eventually got formed into the Korean Taekwondo Association. So the 5 major Kwans got together to form this national idea of a national martial art. A couple different names were chosen. I said General Che first was shot down because Che said it. Che ended up moving to Canada and starting the ITF, which is why nowadays the ITF, the International Taekwondo Federation, is still traditional to its roots of the original Otakwan, which was the original Shangakwan. The other 8 Kwans that stuck together, they formed the KTA, which eventually formed the World Taekwondo Federation, until the Koreans figured out what WTF means. Now it's just World Taekwondo. Where the ITF kind of resists change, and they stuck to their roots of being to the traditional Otakwan way, which makes sense because Otakwan means my way of Taekwondo. They're kind of resistant to change, where the World Taekwondo is more accepting and welcoming of change. They're inviting people to come in and make these changes, which is why nowadays when you watch someone, you have a real hard time trying to figure out what Kwan their lineage is. 30 years ago, you could kind of pick it apart if you knew what to look for. Nowadays, it's blended too much together. You wouldn't be able to see the difference as far as who your instructor studied under. It's blended too much nowadays. There's nothing to tell the difference between our school and someone else's school. Yeah, that's what I got for you guys for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, if you guys want more history on Taekwondo, and check out that book on Alex Gillis, The Killing Art. It's a really good job. So that's what I got for you guys today. I hope it helped. I hope you guys found it interesting. Since I was just talking the whole time, probably no one's watched this video anyway. So have a good day.